no longer the anniversary, but today is April 20th, and this is one day after the anniversary of the massacre of the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas in 1993. So those two events are linked ostensibly because McVeigh claimed, somewhat implausibly, that the attack of the Murrah Federal Building was in revenge for Waco. It's also linked in that there was a political divide across the country in how these events were perceived. So many people on the left and in the government kind of saw this as a common thread of right-wing extremism perpetrating crimes, whereas many people on the right looked at these events. And in addition to this, the Ruby Ridge incident with Randy Weaver as examples of a tyrannical police state kind of asserting itself in a new and overt way that it kind of hadn't really before, at least to the thinking of most people. This is debatable. You know, you can always go back and look at Wounded Knee or Sand Creek or Kent State or the Bonus Army, or there's lots of things you can go and say that this is bad, signs of an evil state or a tyrannical state. But there is something about these in the uh, post Cold War era, the era of a single hegemon, where at least in the past you could say you need to have a totalitarian bureaucracy. You could say it. I'm not saying it was true, but you could make the argument in order to fight the Bolsheviks, to oppose the communists, and that just wasn't the case anymore. And yet the state was becoming even more brutal. On the other hand, though, the way leftists would look at this is right-wingers are racist, and in the case of Tim McVeigh, he definitely was racist. In the case of the Branch Davidians, they almost certainly were not racist. In fact, most of them were people of color, so-called, and their religious views are like many Christians. They see everybody as in the image of God, similar to how the Westboro Baptist Church are strongly anti-racist. But they'd actually, before they became famous for protesting soldiers' funerals, they were famous for civil rights activism, and the Branch Davidians were much closer to that than they were to the Aryan, white power, white nationalism, or anything like that. So there's a divide in how these events are perceived, and they were very iconoclastic for a lot of people involved, including myself. So my genesis of my political thought really revolves around these two events. And again, they're very often linked. The other way they're linked is people will justify Waco by pointing to Oklahoma City and say, oh, well, yeah, maybe it was heavy-handed for the federal government to kill all these children, but then Tim McVeigh killed a whole bunch of children in Oklahoma City. And it's true that he did, but that was exactly 2 years after the Branch Davidians. So that is not a justification for what happened. So again, this was I think this is worth talking about. A, it's the anniversary. B, a lot of people died. Actually, there's probably a more important reason, but I'm just listing the reasons, not in sequential order of importance. Um, and obviously, personally for me, it meant a lot in terms of my development. The other thing, too, is in the post 9/11 world, a lot of this has been obliterated. So I have to remember that a lot of my subscribers are younger, and for them, Waco is probably the way I would look at Vietnam or World War II. It's something that happened way in the past that they've heard about, but it's not a lived experience. Well, of course, I wasn't there, but it was on TV, and so its significance will ebb. And to be fair, all historical events, as they pass into history, they become both more important because the ripples that they start extend even farther, and less important in the sense that they're competing with that much more history around them. So, um, the bite, the emotion, the degree that you take something personally, it's going to go down as you go back into history. And so, people are going to be more attached to World War II than they are to World War I or the Civil War or the Second Punic War. So, but I think that these are really important episodes. They illustrate a lot about not only the people involved, the Clintons, the Renos, the agencies like the ATF and the FBI, but they illustrate a lot of points about governance and a lot of the pitfalls that go with it. Even if you don't want to go full anarchist, this shows many of the dangers that are implicit and exist whenever you have a state. So I don't want to go through the whole thing. If you're tuning in, feel free just to ask any questions. Um, I will recommend a couple sources here. There is an excellent documentary. It's not comprehensive in every detail, but that gets most of it right. It's fairly well acclaimed. Won an Oscar, I believe. You can actually find reviews of it of Siskel and Ebert. As a mainstream thing. It was called Waco: The Rules of Engagement. I believe it came out in '96 or '97, and there were a couple documentaries made about Waco. One Waco: A New Revelation, and maybe one or two others. Those are not totally bad, but they also have some conspiracy theory stuff. So I think Waco: A New Revelation will claim stuff like that the ATF had giant flamethrowers on their Bradley fighter vehicles, which is not correct. But Waco: The Rules of Engagement is an excellent, excellent film. I think it's a little over 2 hours long. It used to be free on YouTube. It's no longer. You might be able to find it free on Vimeo, and you can rent it on YouTube, and it's worth the rent. I mean, it's just a couple bucks, and totally worth it, especially now when we've got all this time to kill. There's another video, and I talked about this yesterday as well, called the FLIR Project, and I'm going to spell that F-L-I-E-R, I want to say. The FLIR was a unmanned aerial vehicle with an infrared camera that the FBI deployed around Waco. So this is a remote vehicle flying around, recording everything that was going on. But instead of recording things through the visible light spectrum that you and I see, it recorded them through the ultraviolet light, or excuse me, the infrared spectrum. And this drone footage ended up having displaying a lot of details about what happened the final day, where the fire started, how did it start, and what happened to all the Branch Davidians. They didn't, quote, commit suicide. This is one of the things that when I've debated this in the past, I say, well, this is a horrible crime the federal government committed against women and children and people of color right here in America in my living memory. I've had people routinely tell me, well, they just committed suicide. How is that Bill Clinton's fault? And again, the Branch Davidians who survived all denied that. They had no reason to commit suicide. They had every opportunity to commit suicide before this. And the FLIR video makes it pretty clear that they were gunned down, that they were killed. And we don't know for sure, but there's good speculation as to why. So I'd recommend people read that. And then in terms of books, there's an excellent book called The Davidian Massacre by Carol Moore. And again, you can get that in paperback. It's not going to, I think I bought it in college for like 50 cents, and very comprehensive book. There's probably been other ones since then. Several of the Davidians escaped and wrote books, David Thibodeau and a few others. I haven't read any of their books. I'm sure they're fine. But there's it's one of those things where nobody who's looked at it comes away not shocked. It's only the people who don't know anything about it who have the opinion that it's what the government said. It's similar to a lot of issues, right? People who have just done no research, they've never read a book, they've never watched a documentary, they've never read any transcripts. They don't know anything except the impression they got from the nightly news, which was superficial and misleading to the point of being propaganda, as it typically was in situations like this. This is in the pre-digital age, so the Branch Davidians were unable to get their narrative out. There was actually part in the siege where the FBI gave them video cameras with the idea of, hey, record messages for your family, let them know you're all right. And the FBI watched these videos and decided that they would not show them to the media because it would humanize, quote unquote, the Branch Davidians, who they were trying to demonize as cultists. They were comparing them to Jim Jones constantly, even though there was no religious connection to the two. There was no historical connection between the two. They are completely separate. So I would recommend anyone who's interested in this, especially in the time now where there's, everyone's got free time, to look into those events and those books. So let me just start with kind of a basic overview. And again, feel free to ask questions. I find that that's a really good way to kind of cover the topic. I can't be comprehensive on everything, but so where to start? So the Branch Davidians are a sect of the Seventh-day Adventists. So Seventh-day Adventists are a fairly evangelical church. I think their numbers are in like the 9-10 million range. Who was it? The guy who almost beat Trump in the Republican primary. Alan Keyes? No. Um, he was a Seventh-day Adventist. So they're a Christian sect. They do have some beliefs that set them apart from most other Christians. They don't believe in the Trinity, for instance. And I think they might place the Sabbath on a different day. I'm not sure. I had some friends who were Seventh-day Adventists. And way back in the 30s, one Seventh-day Adventist kind of broke away and started his own sect. They still identified as Seventh-day Adventists, and eventually they had a place. I think they started in California, but they ended up at this place outside on the outskirts of Ben Carson. There you go, on the outskirts of Waco, Texas, and they called this place Mount Carmel. And they built it up. And during this siege, the FBI referred to this place as a compound, and fair enough, but it was a church, it was a school, it was basically a community that people lived at. And it wasn't very institutional or formal. It was basically people who were religiously interested who would come. In the 80s, there was a power struggle between the heirs of the original creators and a guy named David Koresh. Churches on Saturdays. One of the Adventist founders had connections to Joseph Smith. Yeah, well, since Joseph Smith had 5,000 children, he probably descended from him. So David Koresh, and so that name Koresh I always thought was interesting. That's not his given name. Koresh is the Hebrew pronunciation of Cyrus. So Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Empire, who is revered in Judaism and in many parts of the world for that matter. For some reason, David found him very compelling, and so he changed his name to Koresh. I think he had prophetic reasons for doing that. Also, the thing to know about David Koresh is that he managed to memorize the entire Bible. Apparently, he had it. He memorized. He'd taken the time to study it and memorize the whole thing. So he becomes this itinerant preacher, and everything that we can tell is that he was very compelling. That a lot of people. He didn't. Not everyone agreed with him with everything, but he was very knowledgeable about the Bible. He could speak about it in a forceful way that people found intellectually compelling. And so a lot of people would actually come to study with him. If you watch the videos, you had people coming from England, coming from Australia, because they'd maybe heard a videotape of him or heard an audio cassette of his teachings, and they just found him he was interested in things that they were interested in. Now, if you read the Bible, which most people don't, as Bart Ehrman likes to point out, most Christians have never read the Bible. But if you do and you become interested in parts of it, if you can find somebody who can speak on it in a way that you think is intelligent and is thoughtful, it's easy to want to study with those people, especially if you believe that this is the inspired word of God and this is your ticket into eternal life and this is a guide to how you should live. So, if you're a serious Christian, it makes sense to take this stuff kind of seriously. So he ended up with, to call them all followers is wrong. He certainly had a lot of influence over some of these people, and I'm sure that there were many who looked up to him and who were completely, to a very large extent, under his influence. But then there were other people who were just there because they were interested, they wanted to learn, or they were just going through a part of their life. And they were what would be the term here? Post-millennialists. So they believed that the second coming was going to happen at some point, as many, many, many Christians have thought. And part of this was that they did want to they thought that there would be a period of tribulations when the faithful would be punished and would suffer, and that they should prepare for that. And so they had gold and silver, they had platinum, they had guns. The number of guns that they had, it was a lot, but if you figured out how many people lived there and the per capita, it was about average for Texas. So they weren't particularly well armed. I have way more guns per capita than they did. But again, that's all perfectly legal and fairly common in the United States and in the South. Much was made of this. And again, this is part of the divide within America where, I think that's 76, 70. I think originally they had like 90 people who were staying there at the time of the raid. Several people left after the initial raid, so there were 76, I want to say, who died, but there had been closer to 100 people living there. Well, if people with 100, if there's 88 guns or 90 guns in a place with 100 people, that's like the national average so much. But if you say that to somebody on CNN or New York or in San Francisco, that sounds like there's got to be something wrong there, that you can't possibly have that many guns and not be up to no good. And I think that was the intuition that a lot of people had. But as far as you know, all their guns were legal, bought legally, that they were basically gun dealers to make money, and they're doing their own thing. They're not attacking other people. They're not trying to recruit other people. They're minding their own business. There had been some trouble with CPS because it's likely that David Koresh was engaged in statutory rape. He had beliefs that he should have multiple wives and things like that. So like, I'm not going to defend everything that he did or said. He had some creepy ideas. None of these ideas are really attacking other people, though. I mean, you can go into the stuff about the age of consent for his some of his wives, and I don't know. I'm not sure if it's fair to say that this was straight up polygamy or not. But Jared, maybe this helps tie in with the LDS connection. I don't know how much of a connection there is between Seventh-day Adventists generally and the LDS. That seems like that would be some weird cross-pollination if that's the case. But stranger things have happened, I suppose. Um, so they're basically minding their own business, though. They've been investigated by CPS. It didn't go anywhere. Uh, Obviously, with hundreds of members, some of their members had legal problems, and in the early 80s, one of their members had been arrested for drug possession, but he was no longer associated and had not been associated for a very long time, at least 10 years, maybe 15 years, um, with the compound. So then enter the ATF. So the ATF was a relatively new organization. And one thing to know about the federal bureaucracy is there's a hierarchy. You know, people who grow up, who get the idea that they want to work for the government, they have certain agencies have more prestige. So the FBI has more prestige than the ATF, right? And so what ends up happening is the more qualified, more motivated, better candidates tend to go to the FBI over the ATF. And that's, obviously there's more than that many agencies, but there's a kind of a hierarchy there, and there's a pecking order. And these agencies are also jealous of each other. It's not like the state is a single monolith where everyone has the same idea. And so a lot of these agencies have rivalries between them. It's certainly true in the military, right? The Navy, the Army, and the Air Force are rivals with each other for funding, for prestige, and everything. So, so then the ATF has this big fiasco at Ruby Ridge, which I talked about in the previous video, where they basically try and entrap a gentleman by the name of Randy Weaver. It goes south. They kill Weaver's wife and his 14-year-old son. His 14-year-old son kills one of them back, one or two of them back. I don't remember exactly. They charge Randy Weaver with first-degree murder, and he gets acquitted, which is unusual in a federal case. And so now there's this. They tried to make this, you know, hey, we're going to catch this guy for doing for selling the sawed-off shotgun, and instead we lose a couple agents. We kill a woman and a boy, and then the person that we try and say it's all his fault, he gets acquitted. And there were people who talked about getting rid of the BATF, or the ATF as it was known at the time. Now, federal agencies don't just go away, and so the odds that this was ever going to happen, I think, were very low. But they still felt like the pressure was on, and so they wanted to have some kind of publicity thing. And I think there's a general point here that a huge amount of what the state does is posturing. We're social animals, and the state wants to pretend like it's doing things that people agree with. And so obviously you get this with ribbon cutting and a lot of virtue signaling. And when we're talking about these defense law enforcement agencies, a huge proportion of what they do is defense theater, or protection theater, where they pretend they're protecting you. So, you know, notoriously, the FBI has entrapped like 70 or 80 different people where these people are not intending to do a terrorist act, but the FBI has an informant go and prod them and give them a fake bomb and then arrest them immediately and say, haha, we saved you all. So did they really save us? There was no threat, and they are just engineering this for headlines. So this security theater. And the ATF was into this as well, and they looked at, they need to have some kind of good publicity. Now, the hard way to do that would be to actually, stop a criminal, which they're not very good at. So the FBI can entrap dozens and dozens of people, and then when there's an actual terrorist, they completely drop the ball. So someone wants to bomb the Boston Marathon, they can't stop them. When Richard Reed wants to take a shoe bomb on his plane, they don't stop him. It's up to the passengers. Same thing with the 9/11 hijackers, right? So when all these actual attacks happen, they fail. They don't intercept any of them because part of the problem is they're just spending so much time on fake attacks that they are engineering from nothing. So uh, with the Branch Davidians, I think they knew, hey, there's a sect, they're outcasts in a lot of ways. People will draw parallels with other cults, and depending on the definition of cult, it may or may not be fair to call this a cult. But just because you call something a cult or it meets some kind of semantic definition of a cult doesn't mean it's okay to do whatever you want to them. You still can't violate their rights just because you use that term, even if you can find a definition of the term that makes sense. Um, and I think their thinking was, we will have a raid, we'll have a photo op, we'll say we got all these guns and show David Koresh in handcuffs, and oh, we protected you. Aren't you grateful that we're out there between you and these crazy Jonestown, cultists? And even if there was no real evidence, that would come out in the trial many months later, and that wouldn't be in the headlines, and they would have already had what they wanted. And so they planned this raid. They invited the local media there. The name of the raid was Showtime. The Davidians and Koresh knew that they were being investigated and invited them there repeatedly, saying, hey, you can come and have a look at my guns. Everything's on the up and up. Let's come and work this out. We can resolve this. There doesn't have to be an issue here. Um, so thanks, Dread Pirate Alex. Thank you. So they do a raid. 4 ATF agents die. I think 7 or 8 Davidians die. As I mentioned last night, some of the ATF agents, at least 2, maybe all of them, were killed by other ATF agents on accident. So no claim here of a false flag. And then there's a standoff. The ATF basically runs away. And within a couple days, the FBI basically shows up. The way David Koresh puts it is, little brother loses a fight, so big brother comes to investigate. And then this awkward siege happens, the so-called siege, where the FBI is basically negotiating, saying, okay, you all need to come in and just give yourselves up. But, at this point, it had been very clear that everyone there was going to lose custody of their children. Their children would be taken to foster care. They would all be charged with crimes. And, they were reluctant to do this. They also had their religious convictions. The prophecies of the Branch Davidians started to come into play here, where they're thinking, hey, is this the apostate, the horrible state that is going to oppress us? Is this the lead up to Armageddon? I don't think that they necessarily were convinced that was the case, but they thought it might be. And so there was a genuine tension between their belief, their professed religious ideas, and also just the incentives here where they were getting. I mean, it was very interesting because the FBI basically ran a psyop. They would play loud music like heavy metal. They would play audio of rabbits being killed. They would moon the Branch Davidians. The Branch Davidians had a cemetery. They also had some Branch Davidians who'd been killed in the initial firefight, whose bodies were laying out in the field, and the FBI would come and desecrate their bodies and desecrate their graves, which, by the way, are both crimes. You can't just take a tank and drive over a corpse or crush a cemetery, but they did all those things, and then some, and basically Koresh said that he was working on the so-called seventh seal, that he was writing a dissertation and blah, 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 that he once it was done, then they would all come out. And the FBI got impatient, and they got a couple of Bradley fighting vehicles from Janet Reno, who described them as, quote, a good rent-a-car. When asked about, deploying these weapons of war, she said, well, we heard that they were, quote, beating babies. Again, they had no evidence for this. They never provided any. It was just something to make up at the spur of the moment to justify actions that turned out to have negative consequences and that she was never held accountable for to in any way, not her, not anyone in the administration. Um, and they used gas. I forget what kind. It was a tear gas that was actually had been banned uh, as like a chemical weapon. So like the Geneva Convention banned this stuff. They used it, and then the building caught on fire. Uh, we don't know for sure why, but we know that this gas, it's actually not a gas. It's aerosolized powder. It's actually particulates, and the particulates when they settle, they'll settle as like a dust, and it's highly flammable. And we know that they were firing. The FBI was among firing just regular ammunition, which is bad enough. They were firing so-called ferret rounds. So a ferret round is basically like a flare. We have pictures of these there. We know that they were deployed there. I believe they've also found them in the manifests of their equipment. And these would definitely start a fire, and indeed a fire started. When the CS gas particles catches on fire, it creates hydrogen cyanide. So many of the Branch Davidians died of cyanide poisoning, which is one of the most horrific, if not the most horrific way to die. It's one of them. I don't want to say it's the most, but it's one of the most horrific ways to die. Basically, your muscles go into spasms that are so powerful and so uncontrollable that your own muscles will break your own back. Your own bones will be broken by your out of control muscles. So this happened to many of the children and many of the other Branch Davidians. Koresh himself was likely shot by one of his followers, who then shot himself. Um, Many of the Branch Davidians tried to flee out the back door, where they were all gunned down, and that is by the word of the inventor and the guy who patented the um, the infrared drone that the FBI was using. Right, so the guy who created the technology that the FBI was using says that they were all gunned down by the FBI in the back. So he's a fairly reputable source when it comes to that. Now, there was some debate here. The FBI tried to say, no, 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 he's reading it wrong. That's not what was really happening. So if you watch the FLIR project, they go into all that in great detail. So there's some controversy there, but I'm satisfied that that's what was happening. And then the only Davidians to survive were those who came out of the front of the building, where there was news media presence. They were all arrested. They were all charged with a bevy of crimes. They were acquitted of all of them except for having fully automatic weapons, which the evidence the ATF presented was basically nil. They showed the charred remains of what's probably an AR-15 type rifle. Probably. It's charred beyond recognition and wrapped in bubble wrap, but you can see the silhouette, so maybe an AR type style. You can't tell by looking at that whether it's fully automatic or semi-automatic or has select fire or anything. They just say that it was. The jury takes their word for it because they're the experts. They convict them on that charge, which is, it's a serious charge, but it's not that serious. And then the judge just says, well, because you got convicted of this one charge, even though you got acquitted of murder, I'm going to sentence you as if you've been found guilty of murder, and sent them all to prison. For various lengths of time. Some of them were considered more guilty than others, and the last ones did not get out of prison until a couple years ago. So nobody's asking any questions about the Branch Davidians. So there's a lot of speculation as to what happened. I think my best guess is that either the fire was a total accident, in which case they're still the ones who are assaulting the place and pumping in the gas, so the FBI is still culpable for that. They're the accessory before the fact. They're the ones who are responsible. They bear the entire burden there. So does Janet Reno. So does Bill Clinton. I think it's also very likely that the fire was deliberate, that the initial raid involved a mass disparity of firepower, that the ATF was spraying the compound indiscriminately with bullets. The Branch Davidians knew this. They had alerted their lawyer to it, and they were basically looking forward to the day when the trial could happen and their defense attorneys could go through that and say, look at what happened here. We've got thousands of rounds through the roof, through the walls, through the doors, all the various calibers, whatever. And I think that they needed to destroy all the evidence possible, which included both the building and the witnesses. And also, I think that they just hated them. I think that they were pissed that you would have the effrontery. You ever see these videos, and not every cop is like this, but you have a cop pulls you over, and if you give him lip or you start asserting your rights or whatever, they just get fucking angry and pissed that you would have the temerity to disrespect their authority, and they will fucking kill you just to spite you for that. And I think that there was a lot of that going on here. So this, I think, goes down as a horrible tragedy. All the worse that it happened in plain sight on national TV, in color, live, with everybody watching, and they got away. They were completely unresponsible. And if you watch Rules for Engagement, they had congressional testimony inquiries after this, and fucking Chuck Schumer is there, the now senator from New York, the then congressman from New York. And Chuck Schumer begins the hearings by saying, law enforcement was not at fault. We will not find law enforcement at fault. Law enforcement are heroes. What kind of investigation is that when you begin with the premise? Now, another member of the committee was a guy named Bob Barr, who was a Republican congressman from Georgia, who was in 2008 was the Libertarian candidate. And I'll have a soft spot in my heart forever for Bob Barr, because he was the only one there who didn't say, because you're the government, you get a free pass, you can do no wrong. He was the only one there, apparently, who thought, justice needs to be done. There's some kind of objective law that's independent of the self-interest of the state, which is something that Chuck Schumer obviously does not believe. And so Chuck Schumer is a piece of shit scumbag who should die. And he's complicit after the fact, as far as I'm concerned. So it was a huge tragedy. Now, Clinton gets most of the blame. It should be pointed out that the ATF raid began before the Clinton presidency did. This was something that went back to the Bush years. I don't think that the Clintons were actively pushing this ATF raid. I think this was a bureaucracy thing. But when it came down, they're the ones who pulled the bullet. They're the ones who enabled the FBI to use all of this military hardware, which it was a blatant violation of Posse Comitatus. If you ever watch Alex Jones throughout the early aughts, whenever he would talk about Waco, he would talk about Posse Comitatus. So Posse Comitatus was passed back in the 1870s, I want to say. And basically the idea was that the military can't be involved in law enforcement. Seems pretty reasonable. It seems like a bedrock, up there with, habeas corpus, something like that. Something that's just an obviously good idea to have in any kind of restrained state. And they made exceptions during the Reagan years. They said, well, you don't need Posse Comitatus to fight the, quote, war on drugs. So we can use military equipment because we're getting outgunned by the gangs. And so when they were looking for their warrants to do the initial raid, the initial warrant, when they came to the judge, included a whole bunch of stuff about statutory rape, which is not what the ATF is regulating. That's not their job. That's CPS's job, and CPS had said everything's A-okay. And then they included all this stuff about a former Davidian, again, 10 years removed at least from Mount Carmel, who had been a meth addict. And so they alleged there's probably a meth lab there. Again, complete lie. No meth lab was ever found. They completely dropped it. They can just say whatever bullshit they want to get the warrant, and then there's no accountability after the fact. You can lie to the judge, you can lie to the FISA court, you can do stuff that if anyone else did would be a crime, would be perjury, we would be seriously judged for. But if you're government, you can just make up whatever bullshit, a blatant lie, and nothing happens. No prosecutor, and half the media will suck your dick and kiss your ass anyway, even though it's obvious that you lied in front of everybody. Now remember, Justin Amash should point this out, that the head of the NSA blatantly committed perjury in front of Congress. He said the NSA is not collecting data on American citizens, and we know that he was, and he knew that he was. And Amash is like, everybody in Congress knows it. And that's probably the reason why he didn't get in trouble, right? So, to me, a lot of this, the hypocrisy here, the idea that there isn't really a rule of law, that the state is above the law. We don't have the rule of law. We have the rule of men. The law is a pretext. It's a code. It's the color of law that can cover up any abuse that they want to do. Now, that doesn't mean that they always want to abuse everybody all the time, that all they care about is their own petty graft. That all happens, but I'm sure there's plenty of people in government who, they do their job and they try and do a good job. But if they ever fuck up, or if they ever have any kind of reason to do anything else for any self-interest reason, they can, and they're very, very likely to get away with it. And not only get away with it, become sanctimonious heroes in the aftermath. And that's exactly what happened here. And the Davidians were tarred and feathered and ridiculed. And there's a remnant of people who know better. But all my fucking dipshit Facebook friends who, again, never read a book, never watched a documentary, don't know a thing about it except what they were told on CNN by the FBI, spokesperson, was that they were a bunch of cultists who killed themselves. End of story. Move on. Let's get on to Bill Clinton, 1996. So, uh, and I was talking to Jared, one of my subscribers, last night, and we were talking about Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton's a very savvy guy, and he's very smart, and he knows how to work a crowd, and he knows how to be smooth and charismatic and soft spoken and seem sincere. But he's a fucking murderer. He has the blood of children on his hands. And nothing no matter how silver his tongue is, he can't wipe that away. And you have to remember that every time you see him on TV, every time you hear him talk, every time you see his wife talk, every time they show their fucking faces. And the same with Chuck Schumer, the same with anyone in the FBI who was around at the time, or the ATF, or any of the agents who still work there. They still work there, and they know this happened, and they still work there. Go fuck yourselves. Okay. Just like you don't join the SS and you don't join the ATF. So, or the FBI. So anyway, sorry for not getting to your questions. I'll get to those now. How's everyone doing? Hey Dave, you're cool. Listen to him, not even paying attention. You should pay attention when I'm talking. Why is our government so evil? Was it always like this? So, I mean, the government has changed a little bit over the years. It would be wrong to say it's identical, but the problem is that it's going to attract the people who are the most sadistic, the most manipulative, the most hungry for power, whether for good or for ill. I mean, I think there are people who see themselves as genuine reformers, and they see the state as the mechanism through which to do that, and those people are very dangerous. Typically, right? So if you believe you're that right that you can coerce people, I believe I'm right about a lot of shit, but I don't believe it with enough certainty to coerce people. I want to persuade people that I'm correct, right? Um, I know that I just was giving myself like a sanctimonious moral high ground there, but I'll do it compared to people who kill children. Sorry. Um, but yeah, they were. Look, George Washington was corrupt in his own way. He was a great man in many respects, but he was also very corrupt and venal. And he's also a war criminal and committed genocide against several Native American tribes who deserved better. So that's right off the bat. And the same could be said for all of them. Even people like Jefferson, who is certainly by no means the worst president, but he did many things that were wrong, that I think he even knew were wrong. And so there's basically no golden age here. This is what some of the minarchist conservatives get wrong. We didn't have a golden age. Now, there were obviously times that were comparatively much better, and there obviously have been in the past, especially in the 19th century, politicians who rhetorically were in a much better place and practically were far less bad. They did far less horrible things. Whether we're talking about Garfield, Cleveland, uh, you know, Millard Fillmore, maybe Calvin Coolidge, uh, who's the president from Warren Harding, people like that, right? So none of them are perfect. None of them are angels. And the same thing with the agencies. The agencies have always been corrupt, even back in the 19th century. Yeah, we didn't have the ATF going around killing people, but we did have the spoil system where you would give, the post office member, like the chief inspector for the post or for the tariff would go to your cousin and they would do graft and whatever for the remainder of their time where you were president. So there was never a golden age, and the problem is with the government, it's above the law, right? You don't who watches the watcher. The watcher is always going to be abusing the fuck out of you whenever he can, and that's what we have, and that's what we will always have as long as we have a government. Uh, you should talk about MK Ultra, Operation Mockingbird, the Tuskegee experiment, Operation Northwoods, and MK Naomi. So I don't know a ton about those. I did actually, out of the suggestions that came last night, I did actually watch the Joe Rogan podcast about the Helter Skelter Marilyn Manson, not Marilyn Manson, Charles Manson murders. Who was that? I think his name is Gregory Taylor, and I got his book on audiobook, so I'm going to listen to that. And I mean, those operations are interesting. All that stuff happened. All that stuff is real in some extent. And people like Alex Jones have tremendous credibility because for all the other bullshit make believe speculation that they do, they will actually talk about those things. Whereas the mainstream media, they deny them, and they have a narrative of the world that omits those things, that those things do not feature into the way they talk about government or the way they think about government. And so that makes them either dupes or liars. Now, many people are dupes. Many people have never heard of those things, and they've been conditioned to think if they hear those terms that they quote that's a conspiracy theory, and they just dismiss it, even though everything you listed there, like we know existed. The Freedom of Information Act existed. MK Ultra and Mockingbird. That all came out in congressional testimony. The Church Commission in the 1970s, right? There was this big anti-government backlash after Vietnam, which has been undone now since the first Gulf War, but gave us about a decade of less terrible government, I guess you could say. But there's no question all those things are real. There is some question of the extent of them and what all they did. With MK Ultra, they destroyed the records and they just said it never worked, which is almost certainly false. You definitely can mind control people with look, I've been mind controlled with just regular hypnotism. If you add in drugs and fucking experts and whatever else they can do, LSD, I can't even imagine. It's the potential there to be much more powerful is very clear. Like I said, I've just been hypnotized just from a voice over Skype with no drugs, no nothing. So like the idea that they could spend, because I think MK Ultra they worked on for like 15 or 20 years with millions of dollars in budget, with unlimited subjects where they could go to prisons, prisoner of war camps, prisoners. They were just experimenting on people without their knowledge. So the idea that they didn't know how to get something, now how much and how effective, that I don't know. But for them to just say, yeah, we did it for 20 years, but it didn't work. What the fuck were you doing for 20 years then? Um, Building caught on fire because CS gas is flammable and they were using tracer rounds. That's very likely what happened. And the fact that they were using tracer rounds makes it seem very suspicious that that is what they wanted to happen. Uh, my mom said the libertarians' view on Waco is wrong. She thinks the people shot themselves and put the house on fire themselves. Yeah, okay, Wesley, that's what most people think. Now, I should point out what I'm talking about here is not the libertarian perspective. There are many, many people who are not libertarian who believe this, and actually, the author of the Davidian Massacre, I don't believe is a libertarian at all. I think she's kind of left wing, and so there's a lot of people on the right, and there are also some people on the left who are keyed into this. So this is hardly a libertarian partisan issue. In fact, it's quite rare that I hear libertarians talk about this. Yes, Scott Horton talks about it all the time, and anyone who's interested, go into his archives and just type Waco, and there's many, 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 probably 50, 60 hours or more of him interviewing people about this, which I would recommend you do. Same thing for Oklahoma City, to be honest. But you don't see the Mises Institute talk about it. You don't see Cato talk about it. You don't see Fee talk about it. If they have, I've never noticed, and I'll admit I didn't go through their archives and check. I'm assuming that their intuitions are going to be similar to mine, but it's something that they don't talk about. I think a lot of those organizations worry about quote unquote conspiracy theory or getting tarnished as conspiracy theorists, and so they don't talk about stuff like that. So you don't hear about it nearly as much. Alex Jones used to talk about it a lot. I don't know if he still does. Scott Horton did, but again, these are kind of outliers. This doesn't, even though I think this illustrates a lot of libertarian points, it's not something that is a tentpole libertarian topic, sadly. But your mom is definitely wrong. They didn't. None of them. They all denied that they were trying to kill themselves. They didn't. Why would they wait till then to kill themselves? Why would they wait till they're not the ones who sprayed the flammable gas everywhere. I mean, there's no question. This is just a chemical question. CS gas is flammable. Well, it wasn't the Branch Davidians who sprayed CS gas all over their compound. It was the FBI and their Bradley fighting vehicles that did this. Also, ferret rounds are flammable, and they will start CS gas to burn. And the Branch Davidians did not have ferret rounds, but the FBI did. Not only did they have them, they fired them into the building, and we have proof of that. So, where there's smoke, there's definitely an FBI cover-up. Um, Fire was by design. It's consistent with all the other stuff they were doing. I think that's the most likely scenario by far. Even the way they demolished the building seemed to have been to maximize flames because they opened it up on the windward side to get a flue going. So you got airflow going through, and so the building burned down very, very, very quick. It also exploded because the Delta Force probably put a bomb on top of the only concrete structure. Uh, oh shit, I'm way behind. Yes, I had a cop who got pissy with me because I pulled on the window because I didn't put the window down 100% that way. Yep, I've had that happen to me. Respect my authority. Yeah, in South Park, they're libertarians and it's all fun, and I love South Park, but they're actually keying into a real thing there. Chuck Schumer should be deported to the other country where he has citizenship. North Korea. Uh, I mean, I hate Chuck Schumer's view on gun control is just doesn't belong in America, man. Does not belong here, and he's a hypocrite about that too. Because there's pictures of him shooting Uzis and stuff. Um, Law is just to pull out politicians' opinion and a threat of violence. Practically speaking, yes, they write the laws, they appoint the judges, they pay the judges, they control the prosecutors. They have them all tied together neatly together with their party system on all the top management positions, right? So not every single police officer has a party affiliation, not every single bureaucrat of whatever stripe has a party affiliation, but the people who run every subunit of it do. It's very similar to what the communists do, to be honest. So it's very rare to have a high-ranking person who's not partisan. And when they are partisan, when they're not, they're loyal to the bureaucracy. They're loyal to the state itself in some abstract way instead of some partisan way, which is hardly any better. So it is possible that there could be a misalignment there, and so you do get friction sometimes, but that's unusual and easily dealt with, right? If you have a recalcitrant member of the bureaucracy, it's easy to work around them or replace them. Sociopaths are charismatic but don't care about human life. You mean like Bill Clinton? Best president is Andrew Jackson. Yeah, okay. I mean, he did some great things. He did some bad things. Mm, the 1990s, you were pretty sheltered, unless you were a Branch Davidian or Randy Weaver or lived in Oklahoma City. Do Washington's war crimes date only to the French and Indian War or Revolution too? Definitely the Revolution are worse. So in the French and Indian War, he started, of course, by accident. That wasn't really a war crime, although you could say he invaded France. He was involved in some really, really shady graft land deals after the French and Indian War, before the American Revolution, where he basically, I don't want to go into the whole story, but he basically, uh, I guess I'll just tell the whole story. So Washington only served for a fraction of the French and Indian War. After the war, the government of Virginia said that they were going to give a land grant to every veteran, but not an officer, not officers, to every veteran who served for the entire war, which wasn't that many people. And also, the Virginia didn't have a ton of money, so how they would pay people is like, here, we'll give you a whole bunch of land, which they're thinking about the land in what we would now call Kentucky and maybe Pittsburgh. And Washington thought, yeah, this is a great idea. And then he said, listen, I'm a surveyor, which he was, and I would be happy to survey the land and plot it out. And so he did. And then I forget the exact sequence, but then he got it. So they changed the law so that they would also give it to officers and that it wouldn't be equally given, but it would be gradated. So if you were just a private, you would get like 100 acres or 200 acres. But if you were an officer, you would get like 15,000. And so he said, hey, I've done the survey, and he had the governor sign off of it, and he'd given himself 15,000 acres, but all of it was touching the rivers. So the riverfront property all along the Ohio and the Kanawha and the New River, he gave himself like probably 15,000 acres is, in terms of land area, was maybe whatever 5%, but it was probably more like 50% of the value. And everyone else who would get land outside of that would have to pay him rent to get access to the river, because at the time the only way to get anything to market or to travel was through the river. So the guy was full of graft, and corruption as far as that goes. Now, he kind of mellowed out. He ended up not getting all that land. The American Revolution happened, but during the American Revolution, he did order General Sullivan to attack the Iroquois Nation and to destroy all their towns, and to just go into like, again, it wasn't a war against their military forces, but to ethnically cleanse and genocide them. So he definitely would fall under war crimes for that, and then also for doing the same thing when he was president, against the various tribes of the Ohio, and also for deceiving the American people to create a U.S. Army. You can thank him for that. So, look, I think he had a lot of virtues. He was an honorable man, and certainly, despite all of that, I think that he did have an honorable streak. He, after all, decided not to stay president for life or to become a dictator, which he probably could have done, and the fact that he didn't is good for him. Now, he might have done that in the full knowledge that this would elevate his esteem historically. The people would now respect him more. And he was basically correct. By stepping down and being Cincinnatus instead of Caesar, he is now, the greatest American president ever or whatever, and he can't really lose that position. And that was smart, because if he had not done that, totally different. And I will give him credit for that, for setting a good precedent that every president followed, except for fucking FDR, who thought he was better than everyone. But the guy was, the whole he could never tell a lie and all that bullshit. No, he was pretty corrupt, and he had quite a temper too, if you listen. So, uh, did Bill Clinton kill people or soldiers who obeyed his orders, orderer, or order follower? I don't care about Stalin, but people who think his authority is legitimate. I'm not sure if I understand the question, Wesley the G. There's actually, in, rela- in relation to Waco, there's evidence that Delta Force was deployed there. There's pictures of them there. There's offhand comments about them being there, and that they were kind of using that as a practice to do psyops and to get some experience. And then, interestingly, that Delta Force team a few months later was deployed to Somalia. And so, if you've ever seen the movie Black Hawk Down, a lot of the guys who died there had been to Waco. And I actually was really curious about the veracity of this, so I actually called Scott Horton during his show. He used to take calls. This was way back in like 2006 or 7. And he said that he had gotten that from the guy who created the Waco Rules of Engagement movie, that he cited that, and he had some kind of evidence. But sounds about right. So then the question is, did Bill Clinton deploy them to Somalia hoping they would get killed to destroy the evidence? Maybe, but I don't know how certain he was that they were going to get killed in Somalia. Uh, Schumer doesn't have Israeli citizenship that I know of. Schumer has the right of return, so he does have. He's a Jew, so he can go back to Israel whenever he wants, and he'll be granted citizenship, especially who he is. But even if he wasn't, they would. Um, any insight on the oil price collapse other than what we already do in the mainstream? I don't have any special insight other than it's supply and demand has gone down and supply has gone up, so the price is going to change. So I don't have any special insight into that, but we know that because there's less flying, less driving, there's less production going on, so demand must be collapsing, and supply didn't collapse, and so the price is going to fall. Um, yeah, I just finished watching Rules of Engagement last night. Incredible documentary. I don't feel bad for the Branch Davidians. Why open fire on the team? They had a death wish. Mike, so here's the problem. We don't know that we don't the Branch Davidians did not start firing. Okay, the SWAT team, if that's what you call it, that is, by the way, incorrect. These are ATF agents. They are not a SWAT team. They opened fire first. There's conflicting reports here, but if you go through every after action report, what sounds like happened is they show up, they say we've got a warrant. David Koresh leaves the house, walks towards them unarmed, saying, "Hey, we've got women and children here. Let's talk. Let's calm down." And the Branch Davidians owned a whole bunch of dogs. And so, what would you imagine a whole bunch of dogs would do when 70 men in guns show up at your house, yelling and screaming? The dogs basically attacked the well, I don't want to say they attacked, but they charged the ATF agents, who shot them all. And you can actually see the pictures of the dogs dead. They died in a line. You can tell they were running either probably towards the ATF or away. Either way, there's a line of dogs that are died, which, by the way, the ATF knew that would sound bad, so they claimed in the afterwards that they neutralized the dogs with fire extinguishers. So there was an ABC movie made about this where it depicted that, but no, they were shot by the ATF. So the ATF shot first, probably to kill the dogs. And the thing is, if one ATF starts shooting dogs, the other ATF agents hear the shots and they don't go, "Oh, they must be shooting dogs. Let's hold our fire." No, they just are trigger happy and start firing. So they just open up, and way more Branch Davidians died than ATF, at least double. And we know at least two and maybe all four of the ATF agents were shot by other ATF agents by accident. So we don't know how many. It does seem like some of the Branch Davidians fired back, but that's self-defense. That's not a death wish. If somebody starts shooting at you, it's not a death wish to fight back. So I think that you are completely wrong in that. I would highly recommend that you watch the documentary and that you read the books. Carol Moore's book, The Davidian Massacre, goes into the after-action reports that the ATF all filed after that, where they reconstructed what happened. And that's the best case scenario, that the ATF fired first to kill the dogs, and then they got trigger happy and started shooting the hell out of the house. And I'm not going to fault somebody for shooting back. What is your duty to die? Would you like, not to like be cliche and like violate some from meme war, but would you tell the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto not to shoot back because it was hopeless? That's fucking stupid. That is a death wish, to just let yourself be a victim. That's a death wish. And we don't, like I said, we don't know that they killed anyone. So do you think the U.S. government was involved in 9/11? Yep, they completely failed to stop it and took credit for the failure, I guess, and millions of people died, and they all should have been fired and impeached as a result. Um, there's a 1972 newspaper article on the MK Ultra circumcision experiment on children in the mid 1960s, for real. Greg, if you can ever find that, go ahead. Don't put it in the comments in this um, um, chat, because I won't be able to see, link it after. But when the video is uploaded, I'd love to read that. If you could just put a comment so I can see that, I would love to read that, even though it sounds disgusting. Uh, People are mind controlled by the media and state propaganda. Public schools, great mind control. Yep, that's the whole point. If the ATF hadn't convened on Mount Carmel, do you think the Davidians would have sought violence? Absolutely not. There's zero evidence to that. They didn't bring the fight to anyone. The ATF brought the fight to them. There's just no evidence. They never talked about it. They had no violent history. That's completely, and even like the ATF doesn't even allege that. That's not even the government story. The government story is not that they were planning to attack or whatever. The government story is that they had guns illegally. Um, MK Ultra uses sexual abuse and other horrible shit to create dissonant states. Read Programmed to Kill by David McGowan. He talks about this, and organized pedo rings. Yeah. And again, organized pedo rings is another thing. Like, those are definitely real. They definitely have existed. We have Dennis Hatzert, the Speaker of the House, getting arrested, and he's a serial pedophile. And we have Boys Town, and we have The Ultimate Evil by Maury Tari. And now, that doesn't mean every accusation is true and that we know exactly the extent of these pedophile rings, but so many people are in denial that they will just, when you say child pedophile ring, they're just like, no, that's impossible. That is a person who has been conditioned to be blind when that happens. Hello again. I'm not sure what you're driving at with this series. I know that this upsets you, Luke, and I'm sorry. It upsets me. It upset me for most of my life at this point. But it's important to talk about this stuff. It's important to remember, and it's important to learn lessons. And the only way to do that is to talk about it and to study it and to learn what you're up against and to learn why things are the way that they are. And I'm sorry, but that's just the only way to do. Now, there's plenty of wonderful things in the world. As you know, I have many other interests that go beyond the depravities of the state that I'm happy to talk about and to indulge in. And, for every video I've made on this, I've made videos on communal showering and I hook up and I have a good life and every other thing. And I love to eat and pizza is my favorite food and blah, blah, blah. But this stuff is part of the world that we live in. I would compare it to like if you like to go walking in the woods, it behooves you to know if there are man-eating bears there, right? It doesn't make any sense to go, I'm just going to hope that there's nothing wrong and I'm going to pretend. You should be aware of what the threats are so that you can better avoid them, or if necessary, better fight them. Not that I want to do that or I have any delusions of grandeur, but it might be necessary. So you have to know it. That's not really how it works. If the police come with a warrant, you either surrender or you escalate. Well, so here's the thing. The reports actually, and I may have misspoken earlier now that you mentioned this. The after action reports show that the ATF never, it's not clear that they actually showed the warrant. So we don't know that that's the case. The other thing is they started shooting. So what do you do, Mike? Let's say that they did show a warrant and then they just start shooting. Somebody knocks on your door and like, hey, we've got a warrant, and then they just start shooting. What are you supposed to do? Nothing? Don't recall the cops knocking on the door and presenting a warrant. Well, there was no knock on the door. That's definitely the case. The Davidians knew that they were coming. They had a tip. I forget how exactly. The ATF knew that the Branch Davidians knew that they were coming, and they came anyway. So they didn't give a fuck about escalation at that point. And that's why David Koresh was rushing towards them out in the open. If he was, and by the way, that makes the idea that he was planning an ambush completely stupid, silly. Why would he walk out into the middle of the field like that unarmed if that was the case? And the after action reports of the ATF agents, none of them talk about showing the warrant or saying we've got a warrant. So they did have a warrant, that's for sure. They got one from the judge. They didn't display it. But even if they had, if they start shooting, that doesn't make it okay. And I think for you to think that you have an obligation to be shot because they have a magical warrant that is rubber stamped. No, Mike, you don't know what you're talking about. They had a search warrant. Yes, the ATF did have a search warrant. They in their after actions they don't claim that they showed it, but it doesn't matter if if even if they did. What's your allegation here, Mike? That if they show a warrant, then they can do whatever they want. They can kill you. They can just start shooting at you, and all you can do is like, well, they have a warrant, so I'm completely helpless. I can't do anything. Is that literally what you think? That's fucking stupid. Don't be a slave. How the fuck did you get on my channel if that's your opinion? Well, well, you look like a former friend of mine. Oh, maybe I am. Do I know you? I don't know anyone named Well Well. Is it a coincidence that the OKC bombing happened during the assault weapons ban? Yeah, probably. FBI blasted music, noisy audio, sound of animals getting killed. Yeah, it was. They were doing a psyop. They were trying to torture these people. Uh, it's not a death wish to fight off a murder attempt, especially when it's conceivable that you can cause a standoff and negotiate peaceful surrender. Yeah, that's very true, Greg. And that is exactly what happened. Obviously, wasn't a death wish because they caught the um, the ATF stood down eventually. Uh-oh, what am I getting here? Uh, uh. But just because they show a warrant doesn't mean they can do whatever they want. And it's ambiguous whether they actually did show a warrant. They definitely had one, which, Mike, here's the other point, and I already said this. They lied to get to the warrant. Like they told all kinds of lies about drugs, about child sexual abuse. The stuff that they said about guns was lies too. So, what's your thing? If a cop goes, if a district attorney or whatever lies to a judge to get a warrant, which, by the way, the judges rubber stamp. I mean, we've done studies on this where there have been judges who they will approve 15,000 warrants and never disapprove one, never one. And so why would you pretend like this is some holy writ from God that gives moral authority? It's clearly from a corrupt system. It's clearly manipulatable, and it doesn't give you the right to do whatever you want, which seems to be your argument here, right? If somebody with a badge has a warrant, then you are obligated to do what? Whatever they say, including if they open fire on you with a gun, which is what happened. Everyone's asking me about oil prices. People, I don't know about oil prices. Not that high up. The police state should be considered high agency. Once they started shooting dogs, it was on them to retreat and negotiate further. You can't expect people to just roll over and start shooting. They had 51 days to give in. Who else has 51 days? Who? Like, first of all, they didn't have a warrant for everybody's arrest, and they were threatening the people with all kinds of punishments. They got attacked by, again, because, Mike, do you think because a judge that's clearly in a corrupt system who rubber stamps whatever he's told, and clearly when the warrant is based on lies, right? I mean, you got the American and the Israeli flag here. You know that, like, the FISA warrants that were used against Trump were based on lies. Like, they just went and lied about him being a spy to get a warrant. And now you think that that gives you holy writ to do whatever you want, that that's some kind of magic ethical claim that everyone is bound to obey. That's fucking stupid. And you got an Israeli flag there. You know, the Nazis were legal. They did everything legal. So it's uh, thought goes that it was a bombing instead of a mass shooting because semi-autos were all but banned. That's false because semi-autos were not all but banned. Okay, most semi-automatics were legal. You could buy semi-autos through the entire time. The assault weapons ban did not restrict, they restricted a couple types, but not entire types, like a couple specific models of guns. So the idea that you couldn't have a semi-automatic rifle legally after the 94 ban is completely wrong. Yes, it sunsetted in 2004, but it was funny. The way the ban worked was it would list a list of characteristics, and a gun was illegal if it had two or more of them. So these included things like a barrel shroud, a bayonet mount, a suppressor, stuff like that. And then it specifically listed a couple types. But you could still buy semi-automatic rifles. You could buy semi-automatic rifles that were black and that looked military and that were just as effective. So no, I don't think that there's any connection at all. The Even the proponents of the Brady gun ban are at a loss to show that it reduced crime at all, because the guns that they banned were so rarely used in crime that even if 100% of the time they were, if they passed the ban and all those guns were never used in crime again, it wouldn't affect the crime rate at all because they just didn't account for even a single percentage point of the crimes. Um, so no, I think it's completely a coincidence. Uh, Negative price at the pump would be nice. That's not what's going to happen, people. Uh, the reasons it went negative is because it costs money to store oil, and so all the storage places are full, so they need to divulge themselves of the oil, so they're basically giving it away. Should I buy oil stocks right now? Well, if it depends how much money you have. If you don't have a lot, I would spend it on food and guns, to be honest, and gold and silver if you can find it. Do you seriously have a bootlegger defending the ATF? Of all the things to defend, you pick the ATF. Well, maybe he's kidding. I don't know. It does sound like that's what he's doing, though. You predicted the Bitcoin boom last time. I think that is a very generous reading of what I've said about Bitcoin and when I said it. Uh, if you don't have 100K in a target date fund, you don't. Yeah, it's also true. Imagine if everyone with a warrant got into a standoff with the police. Yeah, they'd probably start being more careful who they gave warrants to instead of giving them to everybody. So I'm sorry. Mike, repeatedly I've pointed out that the warrant process is a rubber stamp. It's a joke. They approve everything, and the people who ask for the warrants can do anything, including lie and perjure themselves, and nothing will happen. And yet you are going to pretend like there is some kind of holy writ, Ten Commandments, moral authority here, and that's not the case. And also, specifically with the Branch Davidians, we don't know that they had a warrant, but we don't know that they actually said they had a warrant, displayed a warrant, showed the Branch Davidians that they had one. We don't know that. The after-action reports that the ATF agents compiled, none of them mentioned doing it. So, okay, if none of them mentioned doing it, how do we know it got done? I mean, if one of them had done it, he would have said, hey, I pulled out the warrant and showed it to David Koresh. None of them said that in the after-action reports. So maybe it didn't happen. And even if it did, they're the ones who started shooting the dogs first. They're the ones who just, so that, yes, they showed a warrant and then they just started shooting at the Branch Davidians. So how is that the Branch Davidians' fault? Right? It's very unclear to me. If the police show a warrant and then they just shoot you anyway, what are you going to say? Why did you resist? They didn't resist. You got shot. Uh, yeah, the more industry can elevate the cost of doing it. Yeah, so like being a state requires a cost benefit analysis. You have to be able to expropriate wealth, taxes, goods, whatever, at a cost that is sufficiently low. And in terms of the ideology and the technology between the populace and the governed, can make that unworkable or workable depending on the situation. What big oil company has the best company culture? Stephen, I really have not worked with many big oil companies. And the biggest oil companies I have worked for, you've probably never heard of. So I really can't say that. Also, I'm not like going to their office and talking to their, corporate structure. I'm dealing with them on the ground. So um, the reason everyone is talking about oil prices is because the media is doing a blitz of articles and videos complaining that low prices are the end of the world. Okay, low prices for energy is good for everybody except for people like me. All right, if you don't make money in the oil industry, it's good for you that energy is cheap. And I don't know why. I mean, if I can understand that, and I'm the one who loses money, right? The crash in the oil market has cost me tens of thousands of dollars, if not more, uh, probably at this point hundreds of thousands of dollars over the last 5 years. And it doesn't bother me. It's good for oil to be cheap. It's good for people to have to spend less at the pump. It's good for people to heat their houses cheaper. It's good to be able to produce things at a lower cost because energy is less. So, and then also for the greenies out there, the lower the price of oil is, the cheaper it is to, uh, the more excess funds you have to invest in new technologies, including renewable ones. So it's good as far as that goes. And who wants to have, look, nobody's working. Everyone's having a tight time on the budget. Why would we want something that costs more? That's so like New Deal, Great Depression thinking. This was when the Depression happened. Uh, Herbert Hoover thought it was, and it wasn't just him, it was many economists thought, well, the problem is that food is too expensive and it's hurting the farmers because food prices are too low. So they started forcing food prices higher. So people are starving and they have no income. And instead of there being a crash in food prices, which will make it easier for everybody to eat, they're continue to starve, and the government's going and slaughtering pigs and plowing under crops and destroying stuff like that. So it's completely nonsensical. Lel doesn't mean anything. Can't wait till gas is $1.50. It's already less than that. It's less than $1 in some places. I remember when it used to be under $1. Environmentalists are like tomatoes, green on the top and red all around, or red on the inside. Thomas Jackson, the quote is that they're like watermelons, green on the outside, red on the inside. They're all a bunch of communists. Like a free market environmentalist is like one in a million. Nice Coke. We don't have that can in Greece. So are you actually listening now, or are you still just watching me and ignoring me? It's 2:50 in Boston. Well, it's because you have the misfortune of being in Boston. When I first started to drive, it was under $1. So you could go and fill up the tank, uh, walk into the store, buy a candy bar, pay a 20, and get change back. Yeah. I wonder if the government's going to start paying BP to dump crude oil into the ocean to get prices up. Yeah, if they treated oil the same way they treated food, that's exactly what they would do. Right? They're dumping milk out to raise the price of milk, and because there's an excess capacity, more is being produced than is being consumed, and instead of letting them lower prices and clear the market, they just waste it all. That's what they would do with oil. They would just dump it out. My guess, rather than do that, what they would probably do is just buy it all and give it to the military. One 45 in Mississippi said you can't really hoard it easily. Yeah, I've heard there's stories about they put stuff in it where it doesn't last as long anymore, so you have to constantly rotate it, which is sad. There are other types that I think that you can buy stuff that lasts longer, and you can buy engines, like you can buy generators that work on dirtier stuff, but they're more expensive. Move to New Hampshire. Been there, done that. New Hampshire is a crypto mecca. Yeah, I wonder why that is. I love to move to New Hampshire. My dad owns property in Maine, though, so I'll probably end up living in one of his houses there. How many houses does your dad own? Holy shit. Give your favorite YouTuber one. I like Maine. There's a lot of foreskin there. What do you think is the reason why the OKC bombing conspiracy theories aren't as popular as JFK moon landing and 9/11 conspiracy theories? Yeah, that's a good question, Cinema Fan, and I don't know. First of all, they are popular. There's a lot of people who know about them and have heard about them, and in a lot of ways, there should be more because a lot of that evidence was more open, right? There was way more video footage of the time. A lot of the conspiracy theories can trace some of their evidence to news broadcasts that happened that day, whether it was on CNN or local news. Um, but I think part of the reason is that the government story in Oklahoma City is partially true in the sense that um, McVeigh was definitely well, McVeigh was guilty in all likelihood, and the evidence that he did it was very strong. The evidence that McVeigh was involved in Oklahoma City is better than the evidence that say Lee Harvey Oswald was involved in JFK. I think, and by the way, I think Oswald was involved with JFK, but we don't have video of him up there. We don't, there's a lot of pieces missing. So I think it was easier for people just to accept that. Also, and this is very sad to say, but 168 people are not worth a president. So like a president getting assassinated is bigger news and more important than 168 people getting murdered in a bomb. It just is. I mean, in the perception that people have, and that's very unfortunate. Um, but it's also true. It might also be that Kennedy was particularly well liked for whatever reason. So that's what I would say to that. But I think that you're wrong to think that they're not popular. There's many books written about them. There's many people that have talked about them. In some ways, I think there's less stock in it. So, like, if you start talking about 9/11, people find that very toxic. I don't think they find it as toxic to talk about OKC just because it's not as big a deal. And he's a slumlord, owns a bunch of crappy OK houses in northern Maine. Northern Maine's where all the foreskins at, so whatever, bring it on. Um, was it on this channel that I heard a Maine high school team, the locker room is 2/3 intact? Gregory Mulchuk, what other channel would that be but mine? Yes, you heard that here. I have a friend who well, I won't give more details about him, but he's from Bangor, Maine, so the capital. No, wait, Augusta's the capital, but one of the big cities in northern Maine. And he played football, and he was himself cut, but he said the team showered together and that it was 2/3 intact. And I can say, having traveled through Maine, that foreskin is pretty common there. I don't know if it's the French Canadian influence or what, but a much higher proportion of Maine men are intact than you find in other parts of the country. So yes, you definitely heard that here, and I didn't see it with my own eyes, sadly, but I think that sounds plausible based on what I know, especially northern Maine, which is where Bangor is. Um, and it's funny too. When I went to Porkfest this year, I wore my foreskin shirt, and many people from Maine, hey, I'm on Team Foreskin too, and they were from Maine. So like, it's a common thing in Maine for whatever reason. Uh, Off topic, any confirm that Kim Jong Un of North Korea is on his deathbed? Just heard this. I can't possibly confirm that. He has a history of disappearing. They all do. Kim Jong Il did as well. It's part of the thing dictators do is they disappear so they can, it's a security measure and it adds to their allure. So the fact that he is gone for a while doesn't prove that he's on his deathbed, and I have no idea. I haven't even heard that, so no idea. Just dropping in. How are you? I'm fine, Kristen. How are you? Do I know you? Don't know, but as someone who knows a lot about Maine, I do know that a lot of French folks who live there don't circumcise their sons. Arthur, how do you know they don't circumcise their sons? Are you asking? I have a buddy who lives in Bangor. Where did our bootlicker go? Oh, oh, I know. I'm watching it. Hey, Seth. Um, Let me look at this picture again. I'm not going to answer your question now. Do you think that something like Waco could happen in the modern day and the government takes as little flack as they did? Very good question. Yes, I think they still could, but it would probably have to play out differently and would be harder because of social media and because of cell phones. So the fact, if the Branch Davidians had cell phones and been talking to people and calling numbers and sending and never mind pictures and video, that would have devastated the government's attempt to demonize them and to mischaracterize them, right? So when the FBI spokesman is the only source that you have on what the Branch Davidians think and what they're doing, then you're going to get propaganda. Whereas if you can ask them or read their posts, totally different. So I do think that it would be different. However, they still have ways to demonize people. They still have ways to put violence, but you will see that they have been more mild. If you look at stuff like the Bundy Ranch, there was a big standoff there. Now, part of the problem there is that the protesters or whatever, they were just as heavily armed as the feds, and so it would have been a bloodbath both ways. So they backed down. But I think it was also the optics of it were just such that they didn't want to see that happen. Um, and I think it's much harder for them to control the narrative. They still have a lot of ability to do that. They still have a lot of authority and prestige that they can use to manipulate events, but they can't have a monopoly on the narrative or near monopoly as they did in the past. If something like Waco happened today, the social media would collude together to suppress all but the official narrative as misinformation. Lemon, I think they would certainly try, but it's just much harder to do. Even if they have the collusion of the main platforms, it's harder to do now. Um, Thought they already did with that cowboy fell up in Oregon, but they killed. Well, one person did get murdered in Oregon, but not 20 people or something like that. So they can still do bad shit. I don't think they can do quite as much as they used to, though. Um, what if Randy Weaver and his family had been black? How differently do you think that situation would have been viewed by both the left and the right? Probably not very different. They would have just pretended like he's a right wing person. When we've had, I mean, who was the guy who was going around, the cop who's going around shooting other cops, and he was black, and nobody gave a fuck about when he got gunned down. And same, there's been a couple black guys who've gone around shooting cops. Who was it? Was it forget his name, Nathan Dormer or something like that? It was all in the news. He was killing cops, and nobody defended them getting killed. It was completely, and the one, it was actually kind of, they caught him in a house, and there's radio chatter where they're just saying we're going to go kill him, and that's illegal. They're not supposed to do that. Chris Dorner, yeah, there we go. Look how they treated Chris Dormer. So all they would need to do is make Randy Weaver into a Chris Dorner, and that's all it would take. CNN headlines: Kim Jong Un grave danger after heart surgery. Just posted. Confirmed, multiple news sources. Confirmed by the North Korean press. So it could happen. I mean, he was a bit pudgy, but I don't know. I haven't seen any of this, so I have no confirmation. No, I do actually have. I could. One of my slaves in the UK, or I'm sorry, in DC. So he's a guy I've known for a couple years, and I've definitely had sex with him repeatedly. He worked. He did intelligence about North Korea. He was vague about what exactly it was, but he definitely had an inside scoop some of the time. However, he even though he was a very patriotic, Trump-loving American nationalist, he hated the bureaucracy, and so he left and he works in private practice now. So I don't know if he would know anything at this point. They Waco'd Chris Dorner. They did, and there's recordings of them saying they're going to kill him. And I remember there was a very awkward moment. I think it was on Fox or CNN where they're talking to a legal expert, and he even says they can't say that. They can't just say we're going to revenge kill somebody, but that is exactly what they did. And again, there was nobody got in trouble for that. You'd like to think that their family would say, "Hey, they just announced that they're going to kill this guy in revenge," but they have so much plausible deniability. Say, "Oh, we didn't mean it. We were kidding," and then we killed him in self-defense anyway, and that would probably fly, sadly. Kathy Tur said he's brain dead after failed surgery and delayed her tweet. Imagine that. The North Koreans aren't very good at medical care. Surprise, surprise. If he is brain dead, I hope he dies. He's a piece of shit and deserves it. Waiting for South Korean confirmation. How many slaves do you got? Uh, I used to do intel on North Korea. I wasn't even thinking about you, but yes, that's right. You speak Korean. I forgot that. Christian does speak Korean. He spoke Korean on Mount Washington with me. So what do you think, Christian? Do you think that Kim Jong Un has brain damage and has died? I completely forgot that you had that connection. Honestly, it's bad if Kim Jong-un dies because the last thing China wants is a friendly North Korea-U.S. relationship. Well, because he dies doesn't mean that we're going to become friendly with North Korea. Um, Presumably, if he does die and North Korea straightens up, which we have no idea if that would happen in the event of his death, there might be a rapprochement and détente between North and South Korea, in which case we could leave, which we should leave South Korea. Uh, I wish I was gay. Dread Pirate Roberts, the way you talk about listening to me and watching me and being, so into me, it sounds like you kind of are gay, just to be honest. Um, he made a fatal mistake of being a fat smoker, gotta choose. Yeah, and having socialized medicine. No women equal happiness. Hey, you gotta find a way. Be the better man and get what you want. Not saying it's easy, but uh, what's a trusted news source for you? I don't know that I really have any. What is it quick and dirty about Chris Dorner? I don't know. That's funny. Chris Dorner was like totally in the dominated the news. How long ago was that? Was that 5 years ago? I don't even remember. And then it just kind of, and that was kind of a very V for Vendetta type thing, or 5th of November situation where there were a lot of people who were rooting for him. Um, I have no idea. I've been out of Intel for over a year now. I don't even know who his heir would be if he would die. Well, it would have to be somebody in the Mount Pike 2 line, and I don't know how many there are. But he killed his. Was it his brother that he killed? Uh, Hold up, 1 second. Sorry, car alarm going off. Wasn't mine though, so we're good. Yeah, he's got. They're kind of secretive about their families, but I know he's got more relatives. You're not allowed to go to Mount Washington without me. Oh, and why is that? Have you read any good books on North Korea? Yeah, so I've read Michael Malice's book on North Korea is good, Dear Leader. And then there's another one called The Cleanest Race, which is also pretty good. And then actually, um, About Face by Colonel David Hackworth, is also covers Korea quite a bit. So those are three good books on it. And then another one would be The Imperial Cruise, which talks about the machinations of the Teddy Roosevelt and the Japanese for the creation of the Japanese Empire in Korea. So those are all good books. Um, I'm saying if Kim dies, diplomatic talks between North Korea and USA fall apart. We don't know what will happen. It depends on who succeeds him and what they're. Who do you think is a worse president, Nixon or Clinton? Clinton, because he was much more dangerous. Because he was more well liked and was better at lying. Chris Dorner was in 2013. Was it that long ago? Jesus. He had two brothers. One was deemed effeminate, and the other was disowned for visiting Disney in Japan. And didn't he execute cousins or an uncle or something? I know he executed some family members. The feds are there. The feds are where? Um, he killed his brother with artillery rounds. What a nice guy. They're saying it's his sister. That would be interesting. So apparently the zeitgeist there is they have to be descended from Kim Il Sung. They have to be in the Mount Pike 2 bloodline. Uh, uh, I don't think I ever bought it actually. I listened to Ivan the Heathen talked about that at great extent, and there's actually some good online articles about it. I know I read, you can go and read Hitler's so-called Declaration of War speech, although there's apparently some very poorly translated versions of it out there that are misleading. Um, I recommend people to go do that, though, because it is interesting, because it is ambiguous about it being a declaration of war. It doesn't sound like that's what he's actually doing. It sounds like he's saying the Americans are being aggressive and already are at war against us, which was accurate, basically. Uh, Kim Jong-un has a daughter, but I think she might still be a bit young to take power. Do you believe there was a second shooter on the grassy knoll? So I don't know about a grassy knoll, but I definitely think there were multiple shooters. I think he was in triangulated fire. I don't believe in magic bullets. I think that's so ridiculous that anybody would try and even defend that. I don't understand either why it's so hard to believe there was a conspiracy. I mean, there was a conspiracy to kill Lincoln. It wasn't just one guy. Uh, Booth didn't operate alone, and why would the person who killed Kennedy? Do you think the terms political left, right are at all useful? It seems like they're just random leftover from the French Revolution, and they remain popular because people like in out groups. Well, you're certainly correct that they're not necessarily very descriptive, but people like them, and that's what we use. So, uh, you ever seen a list of the historian's best and worst presidents? Pretty bizarre to have academics rank and make value judgments. Yeah, what's really interesting about, I think it was Harry Jaffa, who is a big Lincoln biographer, and he's admitted that basically historians are what he would call camp followers. They follow around armies and they glorify leaders. That's what they do. And there are many, many really wonderful historians who are very well read on the histories they study. So I think now, if you read Battle Cry Freedom, right? So Battle Cry Freedom is one of the best single volume books on the Civil War. It's actually 2 volumes. And who wrote it? Fuck. It starts with an M. Say hi to me, bitch. Hi, Seth. Hi, Seth. My friend Seth says say hi, bitch. Let's see, Battle Cry. Someone's already going to type it. McPherson, right? Yes, James McPherson. So he's a great historian, very erudite, and he knows his stuff, and he can talk about it intelligently. But he doesn't know anything about economics. He doesn't know anything about political theory. He is unfamiliar with any kind of libertarian theory or questions about political authority or any of that ethical stuff. He doesn't know any about. He's a New Deal Democrat. He grew up in FDR's America, and that's what he believes in. And he believes in a big government. And you can see stuff in there where they'll even rate the historians like, yeah, they're like, yes, this was terrible, but it's getting it ready for there to be bigger government later, which is good because big government is good. So, and there, like Arthur Schlesinger Jr., who wrote a great book on Andrew Jackson called The Age of Jackson, he admitted, I don't know anything about economics, which is crazy because the most important thing in the Jacksonian, according to Jackson, was this economic debate about the second bank of the United States and the gold standard and debt and all that stuff. And so these guys really, they are great historians, but they're not objective in any sense when it comes to rating these guys. And they're also not only not objective, they're entirely biased. And you can watch, I think it was James McPherson. You can find a video of McPherson getting interviewed on C-SPAN, like Book TV. And somebody called in and brought up Tom DeLorenzo's books, The Real Lincoln or Lincoln Unmasked or whatever it is. And, I have my issues with Dale Renzo. There's a lot of stuff that I think he goes too far with his revision. But this guy brought up all these points, that Lincoln didn't want to end slavery in his first inaugural, and he was a tyrant, and he threw people in prison, and he abolished habeas corpus and all that stuff. And McPherson was like, yeah, all that's true, but you have to understand is that De Lorenzo is a libertarian, and that was it. So he didn't refute a single thing or try and rationalize what was happening. He just said, all that's true, right? So he didn't say De Lorenzo is incorrect historically, which because they all know that it's true. They probably know it better than De Lorenzo knows, but they just don't give a fuck. They just think you're a libertarian. You don't know what you're talking. Like that doesn't matter. A big power of state and government is a good thing, and the fact that Lincoln was literally a tyrant doesn't matter because big government is our friend. Because fucking I worship FDR. So yeah. I mean, it's still a good book. I recommend people read Battle Cry of Freedom, but you can see it. You can see sometimes you're like, yep, this guy is making objective value judgments about something he doesn't know anything about. Until Obama became president, many conservatives considered Jimmy Carter to be the worst president. Would you say that he's one of the worst? Why or why not? No, I'd say Jimmy Carter is one of the least bad. He's certainly the best living president. Uh, he deregulated a lot of stuff and he made a lot of mistakes, but he wasn't that bad compared to everybody else. And he's been pretty good as an ex-president. If you can grab an English copy, I recommend the book 1939, The War That Had Many Fathers. Um, actually, I have a copy of it and I read it. I did a report. I did a video on it. So if you look, I think it's actually just that name, 1939, The War That Had Many Fathers. I've read that book and it's an excellent book. Uh, well, yeah, Wall Street series by Anthony Sutton is actually free online. I actually have it in text or PDFs. So there's Wall Street and the Bolsheviks, and Wall Street and the Communist Revolution, and the Nazis. Um, what do you think about Event 201 done in October 2019? Don't know what that is. I enjoy your willingness, ability to discuss anything. That's so hot. Good night. Well, I can discuss it. Doesn't mean I know what I'm talking about. I've heard you use the term neoliberal. What does that mean? The Wikipedia article sort of calls it an amorphous slur. There are YouTube videos. Yeah, so it is kind of a slur. It's used mostly by people on the left to slur people who they consider capitalist. So like the class. So it's a reference to the classical liberals would be Adam Smith and John Baptiste Say and Bastiat. Um, and neoliberals would be their modern heirs, so to speak. Jimmy Dore will basically call all the like Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, they're all neoliberal. Um, the and they also use it in the UK. So most of my socialist friends in the UK will use the term neoliberal. Some of them even on purpose. One of my friends in the UK I just talked to today was much more of a Marxist Corbynite, and then he became disillusioned with that and become just got a better understanding of the value of markets. And so yeah, he still believes in like NHS and welfare state and all that stuff, but he also recognizes that incentives matter and you need to have some markets going on. So he doesn't want state ownership of every industry, which is what Corbyn kind of wants, or what Bernie kind of wants too. So it is a little bit amorphous, but that's basically what it means. And I use it in the way that the left would use it, and I am just using it so they know what I'm talking about. Uh, I read a Facebook comment the other day that said owning a business is a privilege, not a right. How do you deal with people that stupid? You basically, I mean, in a comment in a Facebook, you should probably just ignore them. I mean, you could always just ask, what what's your basis for declaring something a privilege or a right? Um, and then you could also say, is having a union is a privilege? Is that a privilege or a right? Is being a customer of a business a privilege or a right? Is being an employee a privilege or a right? So they're using that very selectively to say something they just don't like. Owning a business is a privilege, but what about being in the union? What about being an employee? Uh, even working for the government, is that a privilege or a right? Uh, would you say that Carter was a better president than Reagan? Yes. Great. I'll watch your review. That's a great book. I'll go get it. It's right here. I mean, The War That Had Many Fathers, The Long Run Up to the Second World War by General Schultz Rohnhoff, who was, I think, one of the highest ranking generals in the BDR army, the West German army. Basically, he blames Hitler, but he also blames the British and the French and the Poles and the Russians. That's why, hence the name Many Fathers. And this is just a much more objective analysis of the lead up to World War II. Many people just think the Germans just attacked Poland for no reason, and it's all their aggression. And Hitler was a war criminal and was guilty and did deserve to die, but it was like the book title says, there were many people who were also involved. The British were feckless, and they betrayed the Poles in a way that they have never paid for. They told them that they would defend them in a dispute that really the Poles were not the right of that dispute, and then didn't do a thing, where they got annihilated by the Germans and the Russians. So, and there's more to it. What happened in Czechoslovakia, what happened in the Saarland, Versailles, the whole nine yards. So this is a very good book for revisionism. It's very well cited. It's very fair. He's not apologizing for Hitler. He condemns Hitler in no uncertain terms, but it wasn't just Hitler. Sorry, I was going to see if I had that other book on Pearl Harbor, but I don't think I do. I don't think I ever bought it. Also, one of your also there's one on FDR, bro. It explores Roosevelt's time as a corporate raider in Wall Street. He actually profited off the hyperinflation of Germany following World War II. Historians bury FDR's fascist ties. They bury a lot. Thaddeus Russell says that he wanted to go to war with Japan when he was 14, and that like his second cabinet meeting in 1933, he said that his goal was to go to war with Japan, which, given that that was 7 or 8 years before Pearl Harbor, is astonishing. Regardless of what you think of slavery, Civil War, Lincoln was a dictator. Suspended habeas corpus, jailed 20,000 political, blah, blah, blah. So I don't think it's fair to call him a dictator. He wasn't dictating, but he definitely was a tyrant. He was a tyrant and a war criminal. He violated the Constitution very obviously and very horribly. And I don't think he had nefarious intent. I think he thought he was doing what was right, but that does not excuse it really that much, if at all. He should have been impeached. He deserved to be assassinated. The problem is that made him a martyr, which was not what it should. It would have been so much better for American history if he had lived and been either unelected or impeached later. That would have been a much better outcome than what happened, even though he did deserve to die for what he had done. Event 201 was sponsored by Bill Gates to evaluate a coronavirus pandemic, estimating 65 million dead. It sounds like that's something he would like. He seems like he's quite the Malthusian. I've never seen it, though. I don't know anything about it. Would you ever want to write a book? If so, on what topic? Yeah, I have thought about writing a book, and actually the topic that I've thought about it most seriously has actually been communal showers. Basically because there isn't a book on that topic, and I think it would be really interesting. It would be a combination of Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone and like gay adventure porn, basically. Um, Again, I've talked about my interest in that topic many times, but we have a situation where something was basically a universal, ubiquitous rite of passage that everybody went through to something that nobody does or is very rare in a very short amount of time for no apparent reason. And that's fascinating in its own right. Never mind all the other social things that go with it. So, and there is no, there's very, it's been noted. There's acknowledgement that this happened. There's no explanation, and there's no analysis of what that could mean. So I've always thought that that was a topic that I found interesting, and I'm convinced that some segment of the population, certainly not everyone, also finds it interesting. So there's probably a market there. I know I get messages, like I said, I get messages on my subreddit about this every day where people say, I want to talk about this. This really matters to me. So I find that really fascinating. So that would be, if I did a book, that would probably be what it would be about. Uh, Rick Productions, hey, what's going on? Just having an AMA. Welcome. Uh, do you make your videos to try to convince non-libertarians or to strengthen libertarian arguments? So initially, initially I was hoping to convince non-libertarians, and I have done many videos. When I used to do video responses, that's what I was doing. So the Venus Project videos and stuff like that. And then also I was annoyed that I thought a lot of libertarians were not, they're not giving the best argument. They could give better arguments. And so I thought this would be a good way to say, hey, if you're going to talk about gun control, boop, 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 boop. If you're going to talk about healthcare, boop, 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 boop. I think that's mostly what I've done. I think most of my audience is preaching to the choir, and there are other libertarians. There are exceptions. There are non-libertarians who have come here and who have changed their minds. And I've encountered recently. I encountered a person like that actually, but I think that's a minority of my channel. What happens? Double check their facts. Okay, I cannot listen to these lies. What lies? I don't even know what lies. He's out. I don't know what I said that was wrong. Um, who, if they want to go tomorrow, watch less with a specific country at age 14? Lots of people. Lots of people, little warmongers when they're teenagers. If you think Lincoln deserved to die, does that mean you support political violence as a means to progress libertarian ideas? Look, someone deserving to die doesn't mean that their death will advance libertarian ideas. So I think that those are not necessary. Those are ideas can be mutually exclusive. And as I just said, I think it would have been better if he had not been killed. If he had been, like, in terms of utilitarian function, it would have been better if he had been defeated in an election and or impeached or both. I think that would have been the best outcome for Lincoln. Not that he be martyred, even though, yeah, I think he deserved it. Um, so uh, I think political violence can be justified, but very rarely is it going to lead to a good outcome. So I wouldn't advocate it for utilitarian reasons most of the time. Certainly not as a general principle. I don't think that we can say political violence in general is going to progress libertarianism. There might be cases where that's true. I would have to think about any. I'm not sure that there are that many. But that's a big difference. Look, there's lots of people who deserve to die. And basically every president falls into that category. Oh my God, not them communal showers again. Hey, they asked, that's the answer. Also, I would buy any book you write except a book about communal showers. Please God, no. Why would you not want to read that book? I feel like that would be interesting. I totally agree with the guy above me. I have failed. I have failed. I have not persuaded anyone. I am a failed YouTuber. Even the people who listen to me will not become, yeah. Bill Gates filed for a patent. This was approved in November 2019. The patent clearly states a vaccine to treat the coronavirus. This is 2 months before this hit the planet. Well, the problem there, Steve, though, is coronaviruses have been around for a long time. There's multiple different coronaviruses. One of the other subscribers here, Luke, his wife did her doctoral dissertation or her thesis on coronaviruses. So coronaviruses are not novel. This particular one is, and your comment there doesn't show. Was this for the specific coronavirus that we have today? In which case, that would be pretty incredible. But the Chinese had definitely figured it out by November, maybe before. Now I'm starting to hear it be pushed back a month potentially. So look, Bill Gates is a shady character, so I'm not saying there's no there, but who knows? I haven't seen the video you're talking about, so I don't know. Um, any opinion of Charlotte Thomas Iserby's The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America? I think it's astonishingly good, exposing Reagan's fraudulent conservative libertarian. So that's a name I have not heard in a long, long time. But Charlotte Iserby, she married? Her husband was a general, or he had some kind of position in the administration. And Alex Jones used to talk about her a lot. And I remember seeing interviews of her. She must be dead by now because she's very old. I have never read The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, though, so I cannot speak to that. Reagan's fraudulent conservative libertarian. Let's see. Charlotte Iserby. That's so long since I've heard that name. Write a book on circumcision. There's already been several good books on circumcision. So I don't know what I would add. That's the problem with writing a book. I obviously have a lot of the thoughts on circumcision, but they would be very little that's original or none that's original. Whereas with communal showers, I feel like I'm the only early voice out there. This is a market that I've probably cornered already, and I intend to stay on top of it. So, um, yeah, that would be what the book would be about. Although a book on communal showers would almost invariably have a chapter on foreskin. Uh, are you familiar with the business plot of the 1930s? Yeah, this is where, um, oh, what was his name? Smedley Butler was approached by a couple businessmen to lead a coup to overthrow Roosevelt and establish a fascist dictatorship. And he said he wasn't interested and didn't go anywhere. So this seemed to be some talk. I don't know that it was very serious, but they were talking about it. If it was that serious, I don't know that they would have given up the moment Smedley Butler said no. Uh, but yeah, this plot was a very real thing that actually happened. The problem I have with this is that FDR is a fascist anyway, so I don't know. We're just trading out a fascist with polio that people think has a legitimacy to other fascists who don't have legitimacy. So I don't know if that's a bad trade-off. Why do you think leftists think we worship Ayn Rand and Milton Friedman? That's easy, I think, because those are the two by far most famous libertarians, and with a distant second going to, or third going to Friedrich Hayek. So they've never heard of Murray Rothbard. They probably don't know much about, they've never heard of Mises. They know very little about Hayek other than Road to Serfdom, which is kind of blasé in a lot of ways. Um, Hayek wasn't out there debating on television leftists the way Milton Friedman did on many occasions. Ayn Rand didn't do that so much, but she was still very much in the public eye. So yeah, they were just more famous, and they were well read. Especially Rand's books were very, very popular. They still are. So they were just more in the popular eye than these other writers. Rothbard was never famous. Mises was never really famous. Hayek was, he had some fame, but he was also pretty old when he got famous, and he was a little bit more, like I said, blasé in his stuff that he wrote. So, and he was mainstream. He wasn't really that radical in a lot of. He was radical in his own way, but it didn't come across that way. So, I think that's the reason. And also, with Ayn Rand, it's easy to hate her, right? Her personality could be grating and overbearing and condescending, and um, she was so iconoclastic on so many taboos that it was just easy to latch onto her. And Milton Friedman was actually very friendly and charming, and could really work a crowd. I recommend anyone who's interested watch his debate in Iceland. He debates these three guys in Iceland. One of who is the current president of Iceland, and just completely mops the floor with them. He's very charming. He's very erudite. Not really fair that they're debating in English, which is not their first language, but uh, I think that they despise him because he was good at what he did. And then of course the whole Chile thing. They just are not gonna like. They're gonna hate him because of that. Um, According to Wikipedia, Iserby is still alive. She's 90. Oh, wonderful. Uh, she worked at the education and was fired by Reagan administration for exposing a plan to essentially merge the U.S. and USSR education system. What? Did that just not happen because the Soviet Union fell apart, or did we just copy it anyway? She also provided Sutton with the Skull and Bones name list. Which how did she have this? Okay. Um, why is libertarian YouTube so bad compared to BreadTube? I don't know what BreadTube is. Quality of arguments, diversity of personalities, production quality, etc. Is it because libertarians have real jobs? Molyneux is dreadful. Well, I don't know what BreadTube is. I don't know. I think first of all, I think a lot of the more interesting libertarian content creators just got bored, right? So there are a lot of uh, YouTubers, anarcho-capitalist libertarian YouTubers 10 years ago or more who were very interesting, but they got bored with talking about the roads every time, and they moved on with their lives in many cases. And the other thing is, it's BreadTube is the left of YouTube. Seth, why are you messaging me on my phone? You should message in the comments. Sorry. Um, I can't keep track of both. This is just crazy. So I don't know. I think that's it. And the other thing is the libertarian arguments are often more counterintuitive and they require a lot more refinement. There are ways to package libertarian ideas much more succinctly, but then there are objections people will raise that you kind of have to counter, and so it's not as sloganeering. It can be a little bit because you can just say, "Hey, I'm for freedom and liberty, and you own your own body, and you should be free to do what you want." There's ways to do it, but it just I don't know. We're too spurgery. We want to actually have a good debate. There are actually quite a few libertarians out there, though. I mean, we got, but I don't know. I think Ron Paul is more famous than Hayek. Yeah, I think that's fair, especially today. How much would you have loved to seen a debate between Milton Friedman and Noam Chomsky? I think it would have been insufferable because Chomsky is insufferable. Rothbard and Chomsky, yeah, that would be better. Where's the sauce? The sauce lives in New York City. The sauce is also a beast now. He can like deadlift like 500 pounds. Is the word. The sauce moved on. He does other things. He's a programmer now. My econ professor has had my class read and do papers on Mises and fee articles. Yeah, good for him. Uh, are you going to stream every day now? No. Um, it basically continued under different programs and consolidations. As you know, every admin makes up more centralized EDU programs. Her website actually has free infographics outlining consolidation. Yeah, and this is something that um, typical Seth. Evan Anthony, how do you know Seth? Um, the See, people are using their see. I don't know if I know everybody here or how I know them all. This one of the things Gattos would say about the education system is they would go to these school districts and say, "Hey, we're going to centralize, but you'll save money." And what's ended up happening is the school systems cost more and more and more, and we get more and more centralized. So I think we right now have about 15,000 school districts, but in 1910 we had like 150,000 school districts with a smaller population. So there's been a vast a huge increase in centralization, and there hasn't been a huge increase in like student achievement or knowledge or wisdom or cost effectiveness. It's become more expensive. Do I don't even know Anthony. Oh, Seth says he doesn't know you, Anthony. I don't make content, but if you think that libertarianism is this fantastic philosophy that can change the world and you don't get how you would get bored if you have the talent for talking about it. I don't get how you would get bored because you might have to be reiterating the same points over and over and over and over and over again. And that gets boring. And you're always getting into these debates with these bootlickers who think that a warrant gives you the magic right to do whatever you want. And who wants to have to deal with that every day? Uh, it would be easier than reading her whole book since it's 600 plus pages. Her father was actually in the SNB. Skull and Bones. Oh, she found the old membership roster once her dad passed, I believe. Okay, there we go. I remember the Sauce's debates with Marcus Silva. I don't remember the debates. I certainly remember the Sauce. The Sauce made a lot of good videos back in the day. In 2017, coronavirus research was being done in the United States was stopped, including funding. Dr. Fauci moved this funding to China. The only lab that could do the research was in Wuhan. I don't think that's true that the only lab that could do coronavirus research was in Wuhan. I think that's false. But I don't know. I could be wrong. I love Seth. He's my dude. Seth, do you know Garrett? DeGarrett? I hate Seth. Stop making the noise and distracting neither. Narther. Uh, what comments did you make about Waco earlier in the stream? You will have to watch the beginning of the stream, you latecomer. Um, John Stossel is another contender for one of the most famous libertarians. Also, he's a good and popular YouTube channel. He's more famous than many people, certainly me, but like I don't think he's one of the most famous libertarians. Uh, would you buy silver at $8 over spot? Not unless it was like $1,000 and I was paying $1,000 an 8. Have you read any Jane Jacobs urban planning books? No. Um, I think she's a good way of sneak concepts of decentralization and power, of emergence versus planning and non-political content. I have to admit that I'm not familiar with her at all. And Seth is still bugging me. Okay. So Milton Friedman Chile thing is Milton Friedman went down and gave advice to Augusto Pinochet, the dictator of Chile, after he had overthrown a dreadful socialist named Allende. And I'm sure you've seen the helicopter memes. That comes from Chile. The Pinochet would take these communists in helicopter drive and drop them into the Pacific Ocean, which they deserve, to be honest. But he was a fascist dictator in a lot of ways. They think he killed about 1,000 people, which, as far as socialism goes, is like nothing. I mean, even our own presidents will kill more than that people. But Friedman went and advocated to him to liberalize the economy, which he largely did, and Chile still has the most free market economy in South America, and as a result, probably the highest standard of living in South America. But there's a lot of opprobrium that went with that. So a lot of people associate Friedman with fascism and that he was a fascist because he helped the fascist. And, again, none of these people give a shit about economists who helped the Soviet Union or even helped Hitler or whatever, but they really pin it on him pretty bad. And let's see what else. I don't want to type in YouTube. Don't be such a boomer and just read both. What the fuck? I can't take this abuse on my YouTube channel. He went to bed. So you're all safe. Seth is in bed. Okay. Uh, would you say that Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter are the two least bad presidents in our lifetime? Or Ford wasn't president for very long, so that's a possibility there. Ford also seems to have been somewhat honorable. He did ultimately the Vietnam War ended under him, and there was a push for him to intervene to prevent the fall of the South, and he didn't, thankfully. But he also pardoned Nixon, which he gave his reasons, but justice is justice, and that was not justice. So um, yeah, and then there was a lot of good stuff that came out in the late 70s, like the Church Commission and whatnot. So Joe Sorben wrote a good article because Ford died in the early 2000s, maybe 2011 or 12, something like. No, it was later than that, like maybe 15. But Sobran wrote an article about just how he was a decent guy, and how favorable he compares to every Republican we've had since, which isn't necessarily high praise, but there it is. Um, Also, Gerald Ford was a Boy Scout and Eagle Scout, and I've been to, like, I was when I was in Boy Scouts, it was called the Gerald R. Ford Council. Good night, Seth. Um, I watched a John Stossel video about obesity in my health class in high school, and everyone made fun of his mustache. That sounds like a high school critique. Sorry, the only level 4 lab in China is in Wuhan. Representatives from multiple countries have been on site in 2018 and stated that WHO CDC they did not have protective measures in place. Yeah, and I think it's likely that this lab is the cause of the outbreak, that they had some kind of contamination, and that's what happened. Ford died in 2006. Okay. Well, wait a second. So, and Reagan died in 2011, right? I could have sworn Ford died after Reagan. Um, did you already talk about Trump's executive order to ban immigration? Nope, have not talked about it. Didn't know about it. Um, this lab was exclusively working on coronavirus research involving bats. Yeah, I've seen that. They took out advertisement looking for people who were experts in coronavirus and human bat to human transmission. So very suspicious sounding. And they disappeared. They destroyed a lot of their research, and they disappeared a lot of the researchers. So they're definitely covering something up. And it also makes me wonder, if it was the wet markets, why did they not immediately close the wet markets? They didn't close the wet markets. They're still open. And it makes you wonder if maybe they know that's because the wet markets are not the source of this. Although, from what we know of the wet markets, they would be a potential source for something like this. But so would be a lab that has a whole bunch of coronavirus infected bats and researchers playing with their urine. So, speaking of the economists helping fascists, once you've all read the Three Wall Street entries and you get a clear picture of FDR's New Deal being written by the same man. So I've read some of Sutton's work. I haven't read them all. The Death and Life of Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs is definitely recommended. Maybe not your thing, but a good book on history of planning in the 1950s. Yeah, I'll check it out. That sounds like a good book. Uh, General Electric basically crafted the economy plans for all three regimes. Yeah. And there's the whole, Ford was building all the factories in the USSR, and all their planning was done by, who was it, Jevons, or the architect who built like the River Rouge plant uh, in Detroit was copied and recopied into Russia. And Sutton's other book, Western Technology and Soviet Economic Development, goes into that into a lot of detail. How old were you when you realized you were gay? I knew I liked guys from the very beginning, 3, 4. I was aware I was attracted to men. I did not know it was called gay until I was fourth grade, though. So you do learn how to self censor pretty early. All right, guys, that's 2 hours and 14 minutes. It's almost midnight. Let's do last call here. This is for David Koresh, who didn't deserve to be burned to death. Who didn't roll over and let himself be killed because they had a warrant that was fake. When did you come out? I never had an official coming out. I never, announced it on Facebook or had a party or anything. I just started living openly when I moved to New Hampshire. So a lot of people know. Not everybody knows. I think I have some family who know and some who don't. So R.I.P. Waco victims. Yes, they died so that the ATF could have a photo op, basically. Did you see the recent show? Recent show about what? What's the name of this book? The Death and Life of the Great American Cities. I'll add that on my wish list right now. The Death and Life of Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs. Ooh, it's on audiobook. So I'm going to add that there because I have free credits there. They're not free, I pay for them, I guess. The last three pandemics have come from Wuhan. That's true. It's all very suspicious, Steve. Uh, Life and Death of Great. Did I type this wrong? There it is. The Death and Life of Great American Cities. Add to library. 1 credit. Confirm. All right. It's on my Audible. Uh, Always impressed by how much you know and have read. It's inspiring, and thank you for all the titles you shared. I wish there were more like you. Thanks, Hermes. I appreciate that. I don't remember most of what I read, sadly, though. Love you, Dave. That sounds like a very gay thing to say, but thank you, DJ Garrett. Thank you for watching. Thank you for the comments. Thank you for the book recommendations. Evan Anthony, I'll definitely check it out. It's already purchased. All right. So, yeah, never forget Waco. Definitely check out Waco Rules for Engagement. Definitely check out The Davidian Massacre by Carol Moore or Carol Hall, Carol Moore. Check out the Fleer Project. Um, Go on to scotthortonshow.com and just type Waco and spend the next, whatever, 2 weeks listening to every episode he's done on the topic. And, you know, the only kind of justice we can really do at this point is to remember these crimes and to remember who suffered from them, who died, and then also who's guilty, so that we can never forget. So we know every time we look at Chuck Schumer or Hillary Clinton or Janet Reno or Bill Clinton that they have blood on their hands, and no matter how much they smile and grin, that they're monsters and murderers. So anyway, on that happy note, I wish you all a good night.